The content in this video is based on factual, real-life events and public records. All opinions expressed are for educational and documentary purposes only. Viewer discretion is advised, as some scenes may depict sensitive content. This video is intended for informative purposes and complies with YouTube's guidelines. 2 prisons, 2 states, 1 invisible connection. Hazelton in West Virginia, Tucson in Arizona. Inmates vanished from one and reappeared in the other, broken or worse. The Bureau called it coincidence. The men inside called it the transfer program. No one ever saw it happen. No buses, no paperwork, no witnesses. Just empty cells by sunrise, and new arrivals in the desert 2,000 miles away, with eyes that refused to blink and scars they couldn't explain. That was the story Elias Ward whispered in the yard before everything went silent. And what happened next was never meant to leave the walls of USP Hazelton. If you enjoy real, gripping prison documentaries and true stories, don't forget to like this video, leave a comment, and share it with your friends and family. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss more shocking and exclusive content. The cold West Virginia morning hung heavy over the rolling hills surrounding USP Hazelton. Barbed wire glinted faintly beneath the winter sun, each strand a silent reminder of the world outside that could no longer touch the men inside. Hazelton, opened in 2004, was a maximum security facility designed to house the most violent and high-risk inmates in the federal system. Its steel doors, concrete corridors, and motion sensors created an environment where control wasn't just policy, it was survival. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of disinfectant, metal, and faint traces of food from the cafeteria. Inmates moved along in rigid patterns, orange jumpsuits swaying with each step, tattoos visible along arms, necks, and hands. Some were bold declarations, gang affiliations, family symbols, dates of significance. Others were reminders of pain and loss. Every tattoo told a story, every stare, a warning. The morning began like any other. Guards, armed and vigilant, moved along the tiers, eyes scanning, radios crackling softly. Every door, every movement, was timed. Inmates filed toward the mess hall in silence, the clanging of trays and utensils the only relief from the oppressive quiet of steel and concrete. Among them was Jason Price, a 35-year-old serving life for armed robbery, tattoos etched across his forearms, and a long scar along his jawline. He scanned the room carefully, noting which inmates held influence, which ones were new, and which were quietly building alliances. Across the facility, cells were bare but functional. Each held a bed, a small desk, and a toilet. Privacy was minimal. The walls were thick, but thin enough for conversations, whispers, and sometimes threats to travel. The psychological strain of isolation and constant surveillance was palpable. Inmates like Jason adapted by creating routines, carving small freedoms out of the monotony, arranging personal items meticulously, memorizing guard rotations, whispering code to communicate without consequence. Meanwhile, over 1,000 miles away, USP Tucson in Arizona presented a stark contrast in climate but similar intensity in security. Opened in 1978, this high-security prison handled long-term, high-risk inmates, often those transferred from other federal facilities. Tucson's Red Rock desert surroundings gave a false sense of openness, but inside, the corridors were a maze of controlled access, cameras, and metal gates. Inmates, tattooed and uniformed in bright orange, moved in sync with the strict schedules enforced by correctional officers. At Tucson, Miguel Torres, a former gang member now serving multiple sentences for violent crime, leaned against the wall of his cell, watching the morning routine unfold. Guards counted prisoners meticulously, ensuring no one was missing. Meals were delivered on metal trays, standard federal prison fare, portions measured, nutrition controlled, flavors minimal. Fresh fruit rarely appeared. Protein came mostly from processed sources, and caffeine was limited to small cups of instant coffee. Yet, in this austere environment, small acts of rebellion emerged. Secret notes slid under doors, coded conversations through ventilation grates, and tattoos inked in secrecy. Back at Hazelton, the first incident of the day occurred in the mess hall. A verbal altercation broke out between 2 inmates over seating arrangements. Guards intervened immediately, separating the men, yet tension lingered like smoke in the air. Inmates watched closely, learning the unspoken rules, which alliances were solid, which rivalries could erupt into violence. For many, observing was survival. For Jason, it was a game of strategy. Maintain distance, show strength when necessary, and avoid unnecessary attention. Security cameras recorded everything. Inmates knew they were being watched constantly, yet many adapted by using body language, subtle glances, and whispered signals to communicate without raising suspicion. In Hazelton's maximum security setting, surveillance was omnipresent. Cameras covered hallways, common areas, and even exercise yards. Tucson mirrored this approach, though its architectural layout, long corridors, high walls, and remote towers, gave guards a commanding view of both movement and behavior. Isolation cells, or SHU, special housing units, were an ever-present reminder of consequences. Inmates could be placed in these units for infractions ranging from verbal threats to actual assaults. Time in the SHU meant reduced social interaction, stricter routines, and extended observation. The psychological effect was profound. Inmates like Jason and Miguel had learned to manage stress, channel aggression, and maintain mental resilience within these confines. Tattoos became more than decoration. They were symbols of identity and personal history, small anchors in a world where identity could be stripped away. Across both facilities, mealtimes represented both sustenance and strategy. Food was standardized: oatmeal, eggs, grits, processed meats, vegetables, and bread. For maximum security inmates, taste was secondary to function. Yet meals were also social arenas. Alliances formed, hierarchies reinforced, and subtle power dynamics played out over trays of eggs and grits. The unspoken rules of respect governed every exchange, from sharing salt packets to timing movements to avoid conflict. By midday, the exercise yards became focal points. Inmates were allowed outside, but movement was heavily monitored. Hazelton's yard was small, caged, and fortified with towers. Tucson's yard, larger and sun-drenched, still maintained rigid control. In both settings, groups formed quickly for safety, social interaction, or strategic observation. Body language, posture, and even tattoos were analyzed constantly. Miguel adjusted his pace, noting which inmates were likely to challenge authority or attempt manipulation. Jason, observing from a corner, recorded everything mentally, understanding that survival depended on awareness. As the day progressed, minor conflicts arose: disputes over privileges, whispered arguments over contraband, tension over perceived slights. Guards responded swiftly, enforcing rules, sometimes separating individuals, sometimes escalating monitoring. In both facilities, such incidents were routine yet critical. Each tested limits of control, obedience, and the mental endurance of inmates. Evening brought lockdown. Doors clanged, lights dimmed slightly, and the hum of fluorescent fixtures filled corridors. Inmates returned to cells, routines performed with precision. The psychological rhythm of Hazelton and Tucson was a continuous cycle: wake, eat, work, exercise, observe, survive, repeat. Tattoos glimmered faintly under teal-amber lighting from fluorescent bulbs, a testament to resilience and identity amid confinement. Nightfall was deceptive. Quiet filled the halls, but tension never ceased. Surveillance cameras recorded every movement. Every whisper, step, or shadow could alter the next day's routine. Inmates lay on beds, eyes tracing ceiling cracks, mentally rehearsing strategies, counting hours, planning survival. At Hazelton, Jason traced his tattoos, recalling moments of past freedom and plotting for the days ahead. At Tucson, Miguel did the same. Each inked symbol a silent affirmation of existence in a world that sought to reduce him to compliance. By the end of Chapter 1, both Hazelton and Tucson revealed the paradox of maximum security confinement, a place of ultimate control where the human spirit continued to adapt, resist, and endure. Every action, every glance, and every tattoo was a thread in the intricate tapestry of survival, observation, and psychological resilience. Inmates understood one unspoken truth: freedom wasn't just beyond the walls. It was maintained within, through awareness, patience, and the careful management of alliances and self-preservation. And as the first day at Hazelton and Tucson concluded, one question lingered in every cell. How long could the mind endure such relentless observation, isolation, and control before it cracked or adapted? Morning broke slowly over USP Hazelton, a foggy mist rolling over the fortified walls. The clanging of steel gates echoed through the hills as correctional officers began their rounds, checking doors, observing prisoners, and ensuring every movement fell within the strict parameters of the day. Inside the maximum security cells, the orange-clad men stirred from metal bunks. Tattoos on forearms and necks glimmered faintly under the fluorescent lights. Each man knew that survival here wasn't merely about strength. It was about awareness, timing, and perception. Jason Price sat on the edge of his bunk, scanning the small cell for changes. The daily routine was predictable: breakfast in the cafeteria, assigned work or programs, limited recreation, and eventual lockdown. Yet within the predictability lay tension. Every glance from a fellow inmate, every adjustment in the guard's stance, could shift the delicate balance of power. He ran through mental calculations, noting which inmates were most likely to provoke, which alliances could be beneficial, and which were dangerous to trust. Hazelton had a reputation for housing some of the most violent offenders in the federal system, men who had survived previous prisons and whose histories were etched into the orange of their uniforms and the ink on their skin. Breakfast was served on metal trays in a tightly controlled mess hall. Oatmeal, eggs, bread, and processed meat portions were doled out in precise amounts. Inmates lined up, maintaining the unwritten rules of distance and hierarchy. Conversations were minimal, trust was scarce. Yet even in this controlled chaos, subtle interactions occurred. A glance, a nod, a hand brushing against another. These gestures were coded signals, small affirmations of status and alliances. Jason carefully observed Miguel Torres, now familiar in his mental map of inmate movements, noting his posture, tattoos, and reactions to authority. At USP Tucson, the desert sun had already begun to climb over the high walls. The facility's architecture created long, open corridors, yet the security measures were unrelenting. Cameras, motion sensors, and armed guards in towers maintained constant vigilance. Miguel adjusted his step to match the rhythm of the head count as officers swept through the cell blocks. The air was dry, the scent of dust mingling with disinfectant and food. Like Hazelton, Tucson demanded constant mental engagement. Survival here was a psychological exercise as much as a physical one. Mid-morning brought inmate work assignments. Hazelton's programs included maintenance, laundry, kitchen duties, and limited educational courses. Jason was assigned to the laundry room, a confined space with humming machines, the smell of detergent, and an unbroken line of steel tables for folding clothes. Tattoos on arms flexed with movement as he lifted baskets of linens, his mind attuned to every sound, every footstep. Inmates formed unspoken hierarchies here. Those who controlled space or intimidated others could leverage minor advantages. Conflicts were avoided if possible, but tensions simmered, ready to flare at the slightest provocation. Tucson's work programs were similar, but more physically demanding. Miguel worked in the maintenance wing, repairing fences and moving supplies. The blazing Arizona sun outside contrasted sharply with the controlled interior corridors. He adjusted his pace, aware that every guard's gaze could be on him. Tattoos peeked from his sleeves, silently marking his history and identity. Fellow inmates were tools and threats at once. Alliances formed for practical purposes, but were always fragile, vulnerable to disruption or betrayal. By midday, yard time provided a glimpse of freedom within confinement. At Hazelton, the yard was a caged rectangle, watched from towers and lined with cameras. Men exercised, stretched, and walked in circuits, but movement was heavily monitored. Jason noticed subtle groupings, some inmates exercising alone, others in quiet clusters. Each group reinforcing hierarchies and testing loyalties. Conversations were subdued, gestures controlled, each action calculated to avoid drawing unwanted attention. Tattoos flashed briefly in the sunlight, stories of survival and defiance woven into the skin. Tucson's yard was slightly larger, red rock dust underfoot, sunlight casting long shadows of orange uniforms on the concrete. Miguel observed the dynamics carefully, noting which inmates sought confrontation and which were focused on endurance exercises. Even in the open air, the prison's psychological pressure remained constant. Observing, understanding, and predicting behavior was as critical as physical strength. Tattoos acted as markers of identity and intimidation. Body language spoke volumes. Back in Hazelton, a minor altercation erupted in the cafeteria after lunch. Two inmates disputed over seating arrangements. Voices rose, chairs scraped metal floors, and guards intervened swiftly. Yet tension lingered long after the conflict ended. Jason made mental notes, understanding that minor conflicts often revealed larger alliances or underlying power struggles. In Tucson, a similar scenario unfolded when an inmate subtly challenged Miguel during yard exercises. Quick reflexes and a calm posture defused the situation, preventing escalation while maintaining respect. Afternoon brought educational and rehabilitative programs, limited but significant for mental stimulation. Hazelton offered courses in literacy, vocational skills, and drug awareness, while Tucson emphasized practical skills and anger management programs. Inmates participated, yet even here, vigilance remained paramount. Eyes tracked fellow participants. Hands traced tattoos as subtle affirmations of self-identity. Both facilities emphasized control and compliance, yet offered glimpses of personal growth, a paradox of confinement. Evening approached, and lockdown procedures began. Corridors quieted, fluorescent lights cast teal and amber shadows on walls and steel doors. Inmates returned to cells, beds folded, personal items arranged meticulously. Jason and Miguel performed familiar routines, checking locks, adjusting clothing, tracing tattoos, reviewing mental maps of interactions. The day's observations and subtle maneuvers would inform survival strategies for tomorrow. In both facilities, the cycle of control, observation, and mental endurance repeated daily. Night in Hazelton and Tucson was deceptive. Silence cloaked the halls, but tension remained thick. Surveillance cameras captured every movement. Inmates lay on bunks, mentally rehearsing responses, anticipating interactions, and maintaining vigilance. Tattoos glimmered faintly in the ambient light, small anchors to identity and history in a world defined by strict routines and constant observation. By the end of Chapter 2, Hazelton and Tucson had revealed the unseen battles fought daily: psychological endurance, strategic observation, alliances formed and tested, and identity maintained under pressure. Inmates understood the delicate balance. A single misstep could have consequences, yet calculated awareness offered survival. Freedom within these walls wasn't physical. It was mental, a testament to resilience, observation, and strategy. As the second day progressed, one question lingered in every cell. How do you maintain humanity, identity, and control when every second of life is observed and measured, and every action carries consequence? The afternoon sun dipped low over the hills of USP Hazelton, casting long, distorted shadows across the concrete walkways. The air inside the maximum security facility remained heavy, punctuated by the clanging of steel doors and the distant murmur of controlled voices. Inmates moved like chess pieces on a grid, each step deliberate, each glance calculated. Among them, Jason Price lingered near the stairwell, observing the rhythm of life, the subtle ways prisoners signaled dominance, submission, or rebellion. Tattoos peeked from beneath the sleeves of orange jumpsuits, each mark a testament to past choices, survival, and allegiance. Inside USP Tucson, the desert sun illuminated the tall fences and watchtowers, but the interior corridors were bathed in artificial teal and amber light. Miguel Torres walked through the narrow hallways, the hum of ventilation mixing with the occasional shuffle of feet or clang of metal. Tucson's population was diverse in offenses and backgrounds, yet a silent code bound them all: respect the hierarchy, observe carefully, act decisively. Every tattoo told a story. Every gesture, every step, was measured. Mid-afternoon brought cell inspections and count checks. At Hazelton, guards moved systematically through the hallways, rapping on doors, ensuring compliance. Jason adjusted his posture as a guard passed, his tattoos partially revealed under the sleeves. The guard's eyes lingered for a moment, scanning for signs of disobedience or prohibited items, then moved on. The routine was rigid, but within these moments of rigidity, prisoners tested boundaries. Whispers passed under doors, subtle notes slid between bars, small defiance quietly executed in plain sight. In Tucson, Miguel watched as the guards performed their checks, noting patterns, timing, and blind spots. The facility was a labyrinth of control. Surveillance cameras, infrared sensors, and armed officers reinforced the environment. Yet prisoners, honed by experience, moved in ways that exploited gaps without drawing attention. Tattoos caught the light as hands adjusted clothing or scratched at itchy skin, silent reminders of identity and resilience amidst uniformity. Recreation yards became stages of strategy rather than mere exercise. At Hazelton, Jason navigated the caged outdoor area, his eyes scanning clusters of inmates. Some engaged in quiet workouts, others in subdued conversations. Small confrontations occasionally flared, quickly mediated by proximity to guards or the presence of respected inmates. Jason noted every movement, every subtle shift in body language. The orange uniforms contrasted sharply against the gray concrete, while teal and amber shadows elongated across the yard, giving the scene a surreal, almost cinematic quality. Tucson's yard offered more space, but equal tension. Miguel observed how prisoners balanced caution with freedom, maintaining awareness of guards while signaling allegiances to peers. The sun created harsh highlights on skin and tattoos, accentuating the stories etched into flesh. Even a simple stretch or jog could carry underlying messages, demonstrating strength, warning rivals, or building trust. The exercise areas were microcosms of survival, where observation was as vital as physical movement. Back inside Hazelton, cafeteria time again became a theater of power and psychology. The metallic clatter of trays and utensils echoed through the mess hall. Jason and a group of inmates sat along a side wall, eyes flicking to others, reading gestures, and noting alliances. Conversations were hushed, filled with double meanings and coded language. A spill or a dropped tray could trigger a test of patience or dominance. Guards monitored, but the subtle dynamics between inmates often went unnoticed. Tattoos, partially revealed, became markers of reputation. A sleeve of ink might communicate affiliations, past history, or a warning. Tucson's cafeteria mirrored these dynamics. Miguel's attention was split between the food tray in front of him and the intricate network of human behavior around him. Orange uniforms, sweat-streaked skin, and inked arms created a visual tapestry of controlled chaos. Silence could be deafening, and a single glance could carry volumes. Here, as in Hazelton, survival depended not just on compliance, but on understanding the unspoken codes that governed inmate interaction. Afternoon routines gave way to mental endurance exercises. Hazelton offered limited educational programs, vocational training, and therapeutic sessions. Jason participated, but his focus extended beyond the instruction. He measured fellow inmates' reactions, noticed tension points in group discussions, and silently mapped alliances. Tattoos glinted in the fluorescent light as arms moved, pens scribbled, and notebooks shifted. The environment demanded constant mental engagement. Complacency invited danger. In Tucson, Miguel engaged in anger management and life skills sessions. The classroom was sparsely furnished, but heavy with tension. Inmates fidgeted, eyes darting to guards and peers alike. Tattoos flashed as gestures punctuated speech, revealing hidden histories. These programs, intended to educate or rehabilitate, became arenas for observation, subtle dominance, and psychological maneuvering. Every interaction carried weight. Every subtle reaction could alter perceived status. As evening descended, both prisons entered lockdown protocols. Hazelton's corridors grew quiet, shadows lengthening across metal doors and sterile walls. Jason performed his nightly routines, arranging personal items, checking for contraband, rehearsing responses to potential confrontations. Tattoos glimmered faintly under ambient light, a visual reminder of past survival and present vigilance. Tucson followed similar patterns. Miguel's cell became a sanctuary of thought, observation, and preparation for another day of strict routines and psychological pressure. Night brought deceptive calm. Surveillance cameras captured every move. The hum of air systems mixed with distant sounds, doors locking, footsteps, occasional coughs. In Hazelton, Jason lay on his bunk, reflecting on the day's subtle conflicts and quiet victories. Tattoos on arms traced over scars and ink, symbols of identity maintained amidst an environment designed to suppress individuality. Miguel mirrored these reflections in Tucson, eyes tracing the grid of bars and shadows, mentally rehearsing tomorrow's interactions. By the end of Chapter 3, USP Hazelton and USP Tucson had revealed the invisible battles fought daily: strategic observation, subtle manipulation of social dynamics, endurance under strict control, and the quiet assertion of identity. Life inside these walls was a continuous mental chess game, where physical action was constrained, but psychological resilience was tested at every turn. The day concluded with one lingering question, whispered among the minds behind bars. How do you assert humanity and maintain control when every moment is watched, measured, and potentially manipulated by both inmates and authorities? As the last glimmers of sunlight faded behind West Virginia's mountains, USP Hazelton transformed. The corridors, once bustling with the controlled chaos of movement and conversation, became tunnels of anticipation. Shadows stretched long across steel doors, glinting faintly off polished concrete floors. Inmates like Jason Price moved with heightened awareness, tattoos catching the dim teal-amber light, their inked stories whispering silently across arms and necks. Every sound, the scrape of metal, the distant echo of a door slamming, a guard's boot step, was magnified in the quiet tension of approaching night. In USP Tucson, the desert heat cooled, leaving a crisp chill in the corridors. Miguel Torres navigated the narrow halls with precision, orange jumpsuit vivid against the sterile gray walls, tattoos exposed along forearms and necks marking past battles, affiliations, and survival. He observed movements with strategic patience, noting not only guards' patterns but subtle shifts in fellow inmates' stances, fleeting eye contact, and hushed exchanges. The atmosphere was electric, calm only in appearance, yet underneath, nerves taut like coiled springs, ready to snap at any provocation. Evening routines in both facilities were a theater of psychological testing. Hazelton's inmates gathered for final meal distribution in the mess hall. Metal trays scraped against tables as food was served in precise portions. Jason's eyes roved over the room, reading the subtle power plays unfolding. Tattoos flashed in sporadic light, some symbols of loyalty, others warnings to the uninitiated. Nearby, groups of inmates exchanged coded signals, a tilt of the head or a shift in posture conveying messages that could not be spoken aloud. Guards moved with deliberate attention, their presence a constant reminder of authority, yet unable to detect the quiet rebellions brewing beneath the surface. Across Tucson, cafeteria interactions mirrored Hazelton's, though the dynamics differed with the desert facility's diverse population. Miguel sat at the edge of a cluster, quietly analyzing patterns of dominance and submission. Tattoos glimmered as gestures punctuated conversations, signaling affiliation, status, or warning. In this space, the orange jumpsuit was more than a uniform. It was a shield, a statement, a barrier and bridge simultaneously, allowing prisoners to navigate hierarchy without speaking a word. Later, Hazelton's corridors became arenas for subtle manipulation. Jason moved from cell to cell under the dim teal-amber light, observing reactions, noting tensions, and testing limits of both peers and authority. A whispered question from one inmate sparked a chain of silent exchanges, tattoos briefly highlighted under flickering lights, revealing allegiances and unspoken challenges. Each step was calculated, each glance measured. It was a dance of psychology, a continuous mental chess game where observation was as powerful as action. In Tucson, Miguel's evening unfolded similarly. Observation wings and isolation cells became psychological crucibles. He watched as individuals wrestled with boredom, anxiety, and the pressing weight of surveillance. The faint hum of air systems combined with the distant clanging of doors, creating a rhythm that both calmed and unnerved. Tattoos, partially concealed under jumpsuits, caught the amber glow of artificial lighting, silent markers of identity that could not be erased by institutional control. Night brought cell confinement, a crucible for introspection and tension. Hazelton's lights dimmed, leaving Jason's cell partially illuminated by the occasional flicker from the hall. Shadows danced across his bunk and the graffiti-etched walls, highlighting the contours of tattoos, the tension in muscles, the subtle movements of a mind constantly calculating risks and opportunities. Every sound, vent rattle, distant cough, or shuffling footstep, became amplified, feeding the heightened senses that survival demanded. Tucson mirrored this nocturnal intensity. Miguel lay on his bunk, body tense, mind alert. Orange jumpsuit contrasted with the cold gray of the cell. Tattoos reflected the ambient teal-amber light. He reviewed the day's subtle victories and setbacks. The coded signals, brief alliances formed, gestures that could have consequences. Sleep was minimal, vigilance paramount. Every shadow a potential threat or opportunity. The balance of power shifted imperceptibly, creating a psychological tension that thickened with every passing hour. Across both facilities, communication through coded methods persisted. At Hazelton, Jason slid a folded note beneath the cell door, a tiny act of defiance, signaling to an ally. The corridor remained quiet, guards unaware, as the note traveled through hands marked with tattoos, each bearing stories of loyalty, survival, and unspoken pacts. Tucson's inmates engaged in similar practices. Miguel received subtle hand signals and whispers through the grid of cells, each message layered with meaning, navigating the thin line between observation and retaliation. By late night, mental strain was visible in the smallest gestures. At Hazelton, Jason traced the edges of his bunk, tattoos flickering in the sparse light, while monitoring sounds beyond his cell. Every movement had weight. Every interaction had consequence. At Tucson, Miguel's fingers tapped lightly on the metal bunk, rhythmically, a silent counterpoint to the distant hum of the ventilation system, tattoos catching light, signaling endurance and defiance. In the final hours of the evening, both prisons displayed the fragile equilibrium of control and resistance. Hazelton's corridors, once filled with structured routine, now vibrated with the tension of unspoken strategies. Jason's eyes caught fleeting glances, each hinting at potential challenges or alliances. Tucson's hallways resonated similarly. Miguel noted subtle patterns, fleeting shadows, and whispers that could determine tomorrow's balance of power. As Chapter 4 closed, the question remained: how long can the prisoners maintain composure, observation, and subtle rebellion under constant scrutiny? Within the walls of Hazelton and Tucson, identity persisted in inked skin, gestures, and quiet acts of resistance. The night was a crucible, testing not only endurance but the psychological fortitude that defined survival. Every shadow held a secret, every flicker of light a signal. Tomorrow, the tension would escalate. The boundaries between observation, control, and defiance would blur further as inmates tested limits and authority tightened its grip. If you enjoy real, gripping prison documentaries and true stories, don't forget to like this video, leave a comment, and share it with your friends and family. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss more shocking and exclusive content.